how industrialists have climbed their way to the top. Is it cheating, or is it their right as the fittest people of society? Industrialists like Carnegie and Rockefeller are largely profiting because of a business strategy called horizontal integration. They have monopolized their industries by buying out or absorbing their competitors. While this is starting to stunt economic growth, the industrialists see nothing wrong with monopolies. They are claiming that according to the concept of social Darwinism, they are the fittest people of society, and it is their responsibility to lead. But there has been debate about whether this is leadership or if the industrialists are exploiting the working class. Lately, it seems as though the industrialists are taking advantage of their workers by barely allowing them rights and/or freedom, keeping these so-called by the industrialists less fit people oppressed. More about America's youngest workers with Alana.
The rise of child labor in the U.S. began in the 1700s and 1800s. Children started working as young as the age of 4 and received very little to no schooling. By 1910, children under the age of 15 made up 18.4% of our nation's workforce. One of the reasons this was so common is because many families would not be able to stay afloat during the start of the Industrial Revolution because of the monopolies that ran during this time. Many children ended up injured and even killed while working in the extremes of the factory. Children whose job was to reach into the machines were often abused verbally and physically by their supervisors. One hospital reported that they had treated almost 1,000 children for the wounds and mutilation from the dangerous machines that they worked with within 1 year. In 1904, the Child Labor Committee was formed to stop the child labor, and by 1915, several states had passed child labor laws. In 1938, the Fair Labor Standards Act was passed, which made it illegal for children to work. Of the working children, 33% of them were immigrant children. More on the topic of immigrants after our commercial break.
Yes, between 1900 and 1915, more than 15 million immigrants arrived in the United States. That was about equal to the number of immigrants who had arrived in the previous 40 years combined. Having all of these immigrants come in is causing an uproar in our community. The streets are overflowing, and the only jobs immigrants can find are the ones true Americans don't want to do. Though immigrants flip their whole life, culture, and language to come and achieve this so-called American dream, they're found living in filth and getting not only treated but paid poorly. One Italian man said, "I came to America because I heard the streets were paved with gold. When I got here, I found out 3 things. First, the streets weren't paved with gold. Second, they weren't paved at all. And third, I was the one expected to pave them." Meanwhile, the citizens of America are worried about the overpopulation of their homeland. Congress strengthened national immigration law with the new legislation in 1903 and 1907. While they strengthened the laws, it didn't stop as many immigrants from coming in as expected. Those laws weren't enough. Our government banned Asians and other non-white people from entering the U.S., which is known to be called the Immigration Act of 1917. Now, even when you tried to come into the country, the tests were not harder. The 1917 Act required that immigrants be able to read and write in their native language, making that just as hard to come into America. 1918 was a big year for immigration laws. The war now put a mass halt to Europeans coming into America, and now passport requirements are huge. The passport requirement now restricted traffic from land borders between Mexico and America and Canada and America. While this is happening, immigrants are now getting more hate than ever because the government is pushing them out and attempting to restrict them from coming in. Us people think that because the government doesn't want them, there must be a reason. We also didn't like immigrants because they aren't the same as us and didn't fit our American standards. These laws affect so many helpless immigrants, but immigrants aren't the only people facing discrimination.
As Sophia said, immigrants aren't the only people facing discrimination. This also goes for African Americans. It all went downhill in 1866 when the Ku Klux Klan, also known as the KKK, started their assassinations. African Americans will be at a church in the middle of the day, and the KKK will beat them up until they are either dead or severely hurt. The KKK doesn't care about what you look like or who you are. They were created to put hate upon everybody else. even though the KKK will mainly attack the African Americans. This is leading to over 2,000 African Americans being lynched and killed. Lynching is when a group of people would kill someone. Mostly black people are getting lynched by the white people. They're doing this to torture them to their death because they don't feel that black people need the rights, therefore they shouldn't be alive. Then the big trial of Plessy versus Ferguson began. This was put in place to legally separate black people from white people. People said it was separate but equal, but that statement was not true at all. The same riots and killings kept happening toward black people, and this is making people want to go north. This is known as the Jim Crow laws. African Americans are moving north into bigger cities, making segregation illegal. The big issue going on right now is that African Americans do not have equal rights compared to white people. Another incident just happened the other day in Tulsa, Oklahoma. An African American shoe shiner was accused of assaulting a lady in an elevator, and out broke terrible riots. Blackstreet was gone in seconds. And this all happened because of someone assuming that another person was assaulted, even though nothing really happened. It's crazy to think that this is the world we live in today. It's sad to think that black people can't even go through the front door, otherwise they will get treated poorly. It's sad to see that African Americans can be doing the same thing that white people do, but instead, the African Americans get punished and the white people get privileged.
So much has changed since the Progressive era, but there are still similarities. Industrialists still take advantage of their workers, much like when allegations were made involving that Amazon has been systemically shortchanging workers on their paychecks. However, founder of Amazon Jeff Bezos never took responsibility for the incident, and the issue was soon forgotten. So although working conditions and pay did get better in the 21st century, it is easy for industrialists to fall back into old patterns.
Although child labor is uncommon now in the US, it still happens and is still believed to be caused by the Industrial Revolution.
Now, immigrants are more accepted and they face less discrimination. The world is changing day by day, but things are going better than they used to be going. While there are some things that are set in place to prevent the mass of immigrants coming in, they aren't restricted, like taking insanely hard tests because they're not wanted. While immigration laws and things like renewing your visa are more strict and enforced, there are things changing daily.
Looking back at the 1900s, it seems that history is repeating itself. Nobody has moved on from the racism. No one has moved on from our past, and we continue to let this happen. We continue to see racism in our everyday lives, and no one wants to do anything about this major issue. African Americans should be treated the same way that all people are getting treated. Asian people, white people, all people. No one can outlive the past because it has impacted our life so much. It has impacted our life so much because so many people have died and have been affected by the 1900s.